Watch on YouTube or Facebook and use the chat function to send questions or comments to the studio. We'd like to thank our partners, and in particular, the World War II Museum in New Orleans. Eventually, we'll all be able to travel again, and if you're heading to New Orleans, be sure to go to the World War II Museum. They have a fantastic collection, and they're also generous with their time and really enthusiastic and helpful. And we'd also like to thank the World War II Memorial and the Friends of the World War II Memorial in Washington, D.C., which is another great place to visit, as well as the Rosies. The Rosies are an American association of women who stood together during the Second World War and moved into the heavy industries where no one was working at the time. They have excellent stories to tell, and the work that they do has continued on since the Second World War for the last 75 years, and I'm really pleased to be able to bring you a few Rosies today to talk about their experiences during that time and the work that they've done since. Be sure to go to our website, europeremembers.com. You can make your own little I Remember or a logo with your name, and be sure to post it with hashtag I Remember or hashtag europeremembers.com. I'm really pleased to bring you Ruth Edwards from West Virginia. Hi, Ruth.
Hi, Ruth.
Hi, Ruth. How are you?
Hi, Ruth. How are you? Good morning.
It's great that you could be here today. And I understand that you worked as an expediter at the Naval Ordnance Center in Charleston, West Virginia. Can you please tell us, what does an expediter do? And what was the Naval Ordnance Center like when you first joined?
I'm sorry, I can hardly understand you. I didn't hear you very well.
That's okay. Tell me about your work as an expediter at the Naval Ordnance Center.
I'll just assume I understand your question, but I grew up in a rural area in West Virginia, and I lived with my grandparents. We lived on a farm, and it was during the Great Depression. So everyone was, I suppose we were considered poor, but we didn't know it because everybody else was too. And I graduated from a small high school in West Virginia. And I said my claim to fame would be the fact that I had graduated from high school with retired Brigadier General Chuck Yeager, who wrote The Sound Barrier.
Fantastic. And what were your plans when you left high school? What were you expecting to do?
I'm sorry, I'm not hearing your questions.
That's okay. We're going to take a moment to make sure that you can hear us nice and clear. And in the meantime, I'm really pleased to introduce Fabio. Fabio is somebody who went to the website and registered to take part in these discussions and to talk to Ruth, as well as some of the other Rosies that we've got on later today. Fabio is joining us from Austria. How are you, Fabio?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Good. It's lovely to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
So, Fabio, let's see how it goes with Ruth. Ruth, are you able to hear Fabio any better than you can hear me?
Hello, can you hear me?
Okay, so Fabio, perhaps tell us what sparked your interest in this project and in the Rosies.
Well, I saw an article about this project on the news in Austria, and I couldn't find a link, so I started to Google around your project, and eventually I came to your website. And since we all have a lot of free time now, I thought, why not register for this? Also because usually people in Austria so in a lot of schools in Austria, there's eyewitnesses from World War II who come and visit. And sadly, the eyewitness who came to our school every year died a few years before it was my class's turn to talk to her. And so I'm really glad to be able to talk to a witness now. So yeah.
So tell me about the witnesses that you've spoken to previously. Were they Rosies or were they people from Austria?
So the thing is, actually, I haven't spoken to a lot of witnesses because, it didn't work in my school. But people in Austria are usually, there are a lot of people from the Jewish community who are in concentration camps and talk about their experiences. And also, I know people from my family who have all different experiences with the war, having to fight or flee. At least I have family in all parts of the world because they had to flee from the Nazis during World War II. So yeah.
Okay, that's a really personal connection to the history of World War II, and I really hope that we can provide an experience today that makes that deeper and complements what you already know. Perhaps you could quickly introduce me to your flatmates, your roommates?
Yeah, so this is Larissa. She's my girlfriend. Hi. And I'm living with her and her sister, Alice.
Hi.
Hi. It's lovely to meet you.
Lovely to meet all of you.
We have had a couple of sound problems, but I think we've resolved them. Perhaps you'd like to say hi to Ruth.
Yes. Hi, Ruth. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hello. How are you doing? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can now.
Okay.
There's something wrong with my sound.
Okay, I think it works now. Can you hear me now? I was asking how you're doing.
Yes, I can hear you.
So our first question is, we understand that you worked at the Naval Ordnance Center in Boston. How did you get the job? Did you apply, or did you get recruited, sort of? And what kind of background did you have to do this sort of job?
What kind of what? I didn't understand that part.
What was your background? Your educational background, so you could do this specific job at the Naval Ordnance Center.
Okay, I just have a high school education because the time I graduated, the war was happening, and we got our educations on hold. So I didn't go back to college right then. I worked in a defense plant, Carnegie, Illinois Steel in South Charleston, West Virginia, as a conductor. And that meant that I checked different types of things that were making barrels, and it was a steel plant, Carnegie Steel in South Charleston, West Virginia. So I helped with that during the war. And after that, I went back to college, and I got my master's degree from Marsh University in Huntington, West Virginia. And I taught school business subjects for a number of years. And then I went to the State Department of Education and was state supervisor of business education in West Virginia.
So would you say that because of your work in World War II, is that why you chose a path in business education?
Yes. The fact that I worked in the defense plant as an expediter made me a Rosie the Riveter. Of course, it wasn't a Rosie the Riveter then because this came along much later. So I didn't know at the time I was being a Rosie the Riveter.
Sorry, what was the last part I couldn't understand?
We didn't know then that we were considered Rosie the Riveters because we were just working in a defense plant.
Yes, and another question is, how did you feel, or women in general, or you in particular, did you feel empowered through being able to work, since the workforce before World War II was mainly consistent of men? Was there kind of push, or how did you feel about suddenly having to work in jobs that usually men would do before that?
I didn't really understand your question, but I was state supervisor of business ed, which meant I traveled all over the state checking schools to make sure they had the proper equipment and to teach business subjects in the technical world.
Another question was, how did you feel about working in the defense industry? Especially with the situation of your then husband to be, I read that he was detained in Japan. How did you feel about working in an industry that supported the whole war or was crucial to the whole war machinery?
We had to have certain training before we could work in the defense plant. And it was shift work. We worked 8 to 4 and 4 to 12 and 12 to 8. So we did shift work. Okay. And we had to have some training before we took that job.
I see. Do you remember how did your role as a woman in that time change? Did anything change with you working in that specific job, both in your job and in your all like normal everyday life?
We didn't really, we hadn't really prepared for that sort of jobs. So it was an altogether different experience for us. But there were women from all over the state that worked in that plant. And some of them had never had a job outside the home before. In fact, some of them had never had on a pair of slacks. And you had to wear slacks to do the job. And it was quite a shock for many of them. And some of them had difficulties in getting to the plant. And it wasn't an easy job. So everybody worked together. We pulled together. We saw the need, and we united and got the job done. And that's why the slogan of "We can do it," which signifies unity in work. And when there's a need, the women pulled together and did the job. That the men were in service. They were all in the military. So the manufacturing plants converted into making parts for the airplane factories and the shipyards and all that. And mine was, I was in the plant that made parts for ships. So we were in that department.
I see.
So I think now that we actually have Francesco from Italy joining us as well. And Francesco, I understand that you've got a question for Ruth too. Hi, Francesco.
I'm sorry, but I cannot hear you. Your voice is not coming through to me.
Oh, hello. Can you hear me now?
Okay. Let's go back to Fabio, Alice. And I think Fabio and Alice had another question for us.
I'm sorry, I just don't, I can't hear you. Your voice is not loud enough for me to hear.
That's okay, Ruth. The sound isn't very good at the moment, but let's try again with Francesco. Are you there, Francesco?
Yeah, I am. I'm here.
Nice and clear. Can you hear Francesco, Ruth?
Can you hear me, Ruth?
I can hear you, but I cannot hear her voice. I can hear you.
I'm just going to be quiet, and Francesco has some questions for you. Go ahead, Francesco.
Okay. Nice to meet you. My question is, how was the life back then? I mean, what do you remember of your experience back then when the Japanese take over the control of your plant when you was? I can't hear.
Sure. So, Ruth, Francesco is asking about your contact with the Japanese. And I think, if I remember rightly, Ruth's husband was actually in the Pacific Theatre of War, where he was part of the Allies who fought against the Japanese, while Ruth was in West Virginia working for in the plant as an expediter. So, Ruth, Francesco was asking how you felt towards the Japanese at the time and how you felt after the war when your husband came home.
I'm sure I'm not going to answer the question you asked me, but during the war, like I say, I graduated with Chuck Yeager, so we dated a while, and then I had a true love who was fighting, and he was in Manila, so he was captured, and he was on the death march, and was imprisoned in Japanese prison camps for 42 months. And during that time, he was got down to 74 pounds and was put in what they call the death house and was expected to die. So they just were going to leave him alone and let him die. And he had a friend who saw him. Like I said, he was down to 76 pounds. And his friend saw him and asked the Japanese guards if they would let him take care of him. And they said yes. So he said he'd check on him every few days. And he did. And he stole rice out of the kitchen and gave him a little extra portion of rice. So he was responsible for him being able to come back home. And as part of the Rosie movement, it was part of my job to take care of him, which I was just going to do anyway. We weren't married at the time. We were married 3 days after he came home from service. So my job, I had the job taking care of him. He was able to work, but he was just considered totally disabled in just a few years. So he was totally permanently disabled. And we had a good life together. We had 2 children, and he did the best he could. He held down a job and as best he could, but he did hourly.
So for those who are following at home and having some difficulties with the sound, Ruth's husband fought in the Philippines and was on what was known as a death march, where he walked 42 miles, and that death march was known as the Bataan March. And then when he came home, he and Ruth were married very shortly after he left the service, so 3 days after, and they went on to have a wonderful life together. They had 2 children, but unfortunately he did suffer some profound injuries during that time, and while they had a wonderful relationship, Ruth cared for him for quite a few years after. And I think you had another question about Ruth's experience as well, right, Francesco?
Yeah, exactly.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me, Ruth?
Yes, I hear you.
Oh, okay. So my next question and the last one is how was the life back then? I mean, what's your experience? Before you were captured, what did you do in that time?
Sure.
The main lessons I learned during all this experience was the necessity for people to come together when there's a need, and there's strength in unity. You stick together and you do the job that needs to be done. Just like in today's world with the concern over the coronavirus, we all have to stick together. Everybody sticks together, and we know that there is a silver lining. So we know that it's going to be over soon, and we'll get back to our life but not the normal we had, but get back to whatever is considered normal today. but I learned a lot from my experience because it was just the need to come together, which we did, and we accomplished what we set out to accomplish, which was to help in the war and to have world peace. It was not strictly one movement at all. It was just that everybody needs to come together when we have a need, and we work together to get the matter solved, get the problem solved.
Thank you. Thank you, Ruth.
All right, thank you, Ruth. I'm sorry there have been some sound issues, but for people who are interested, Ruth has had an absolutely outstanding career. She worked for the state at a supervisory level in business education, and she's also very involved with the Rosies, which is a group that brings together women who were involved in World War II and younger generations to work together. And a lot of the mission and the tasks that they set out to do are around work and the value of work and good work and the way that it brings people together and helps build community. We'd definitely encourage people who are interested in the Rosies to have a look at their website and to post your thoughts or perhaps a tribute to the Rosies online. You can use hashtag #IRemember or hashtag #EuropeRemembers, and we will make sure that we're able to send those posts and any compliments that you have to the Rosies, and particularly to Ruth after this conversation. All right, Ruth, are you able to hear me now? Has there been any improvement in the sound? Hello, Ruth. Okay, so we're just going to take a quick break for a couple of minutes, and when we come back, we have another wonderful witness, also a Rosie, whose name is Mozella Brown, and she's from Ohio. She worked on some of the airplanes that were made in Akron, Ohio during the war, and she still has some of the materials that she used, and she's going to tell us about her experiences both at the plant and what her life was like before and after that work. Thanks very much for joining us, and we will see you again in 2 minutes. Welcome back to Europe Remembers and our conversations with people who remember World War II. We're really happy to be able to bring you 20 different people from 7 countries over the course of the week. And if you're just joining us, then you can watch the interview with Ruth Brown on our website, www.europeremembers.com, or if you're following us live, feel free to send your questions to the studio using the comment function. I'm very pleased to be able to introduce Mozella Brown, our next guest. Mozella is one of the Rosies, named after Rosie the Riveter, the famous icon from the posters, and she was in fact a riveter. How are you, Mozella?
I'm fine, thank you.
It's lovely that you could join us here today. Thank you.
What'd she say?
She said it's nice that you can join us. Thank you.
And Mozella, I understand that you moved to Akron, Ohio at 21. Can you tell us a bit about your background? Where were you before Akron?
I was born in West Virginia in Nicholas County. I was a number 10 in a family of farmers. My dad and mother had a farm, and I was the youngest of 10 in that family. So, I had the hand-me-downs. I was born in September the 10th, 1920. So if God lets me live until September the 10th, I should hit the 100 mark. But God's been good to me. I've had good health, and I went to a little country school to the 8th grade, and that was as much schooling as I got. There was no such thing as buses back then. We just had mud roads, and there was no such thing as snow days. We went to school whether it was snowing or not. Too bad to go. We stayed home, but we still. My mother passed away shortly after I graduated from high school, but until that time, I just worked around at anything I could get. I never had a chance to go to high school. So I just started doing housework for people for whatever I could get. There's a little coal mining camp, not about 3 miles from our home. And I would go there and wash walls and scrub floors and do things like that. For finally, one have to get someone else there in town. So did I do something wrong?
No, go ahead.
And they were World War II was on at that time, and they didn't come through their recruiting, but they did go through a lot of towns in country or out through the country, and they would tell the girls, we have a job for you and a place for you to stay. And they would take them and get them in the towns where there was work. So I went on my own. I had some friends that told me I could come and stay with them, and they'd help me to get a job. And I left the fountain. I think I had about $35 in my pocket and started Akron, Ohio. And I got a job there in aircraft on the afternoon shift. And I stayed with those people till I got a payday of my own, till I could afford to pay for a room. And then I got a room and lived with some other people that are in town. In Akron, in all those cities, everybody that had an extra room was renting it out because there were hundreds of girls coming in to work in those places. And everybody that had an extra room was ready to rent it out. I rented in a place that they only kept girls. There was a couple widow ladies, both daughter and mother, that had a house there, and they rented the rooms out only to girls. So we had a nice place to stay. And they cooked for us. But all the time I was there, I worked the same shift on the evening shift. Where am I supposed to stop?
So now with Mozella, thank you for that. That was, you've had a really You've had so many experiences, and we're really happy to be able to introduce you to Vicky, who's coming to us from Phoenix. I'm not sure exactly what time it is in Phoenix, but I'm pretty sure she got up really early to be here. So Vicky, I understand you've got some questions for Mozella. Would you like to go ahead and have a chat to her?
Vicky's going to ask you questions.
So Vicky, you've got some questions for Mozella, is that right? Not to worry. Perhaps, Mozella, can you tell us, how did you choose to go to the Corsair plant in Ohio? Why that one? Why not one of the other industries? Why not ships? Why did you choose airplanes?
Why did you go to Ohio?
I had my sister had married some people that were there, and they said they could help me. I had never been out of town or never been any place where there was a large city. And they said they'd help me get started and help me get around because they knew my mother had passed away. And really, Dad wasn't able to work at that time. He was unable. Really, we needed help. And so those people offered me to stay with them till I got started. And I took the advantage and went with them.
So we've got someone from your home state here, Steve from West Virginia, who's a teacher, and I'm pretty sure he's looking for some insights for his class, and he'd like to ask you some questions as well. Go ahead, Steve.
Hello, how you doing, Mozella? You doing all right this morning?
Yes, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing fine.
All right, well, I'm from Huntington, so not too far from Nicholas County. But one of my students, he had a question, and his question was, what was it like working in the factories?
It was certainly different from hoeing corn and working in a garden and scrubbing floors and washing walls. It was so much better. It was just all different to me from a country girl that had never been around anything at that time. And it was different to go in that way and all that stuff. It was amusing. You didn't get into it. You just stood back. And I was very careful because I was shy and I wasn't very adventurous to get down into things. I just more or less watched what was going on. Then I would follow along, try to do the same thing that other people were doing. You have to learn as you go along.
Yeah, I understand. When the war ended, do you wish you could have stayed in the plant working?
No, I had some health problems, and maybe a couple months before the war ended, I quit and came back to the little coal company. I had a brother that lived there in town, and I came back to his house there in that little coal company. And at that time, the same place I had worked before I left, they had put me back to work only in the store, in the coal company store, where I worked there for years.
All right. Well, once again, we thank you for for what you did in your service, during World War II.
Well, I had to do it. We were just trying to get those boys home.
I understand. Yeah, my grandfather, he was in the Navy in Italy, so.
A lot of the boys that were in high school at that time knew when they graduated, they were going to be drafted. So they would quit before they graduated so they could get in the branch of service they wanted and enlist and get in the branch of service they wanted. And then after they come back, if they got back, they would finish their schooling.
So, Mozella, I'd like to introduce you to the group to another group that also have some questions for you. So there are 3 young people from Austria who have gone to our website, europeremembers.com, and put their names down to ask you some questions. They're here with us now. In the centre, you'll see Fabio and Alice, and Alice's sister, and they'd also like to have a chat to you.
Hello, how are you?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hear us?
Hi, Mozelle. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Sure, go ahead, Fabio.
So I read that you're doing a lot of work to promote the Rosies and the work of the Rosies back then, after the World War. What can you tell us about your work and your community with the Rosies?
You know, the Rosies wasn't very well respected at that time, or they weren't in my community, because what we did was men's work. A woman wasn't supposed to work in a plant. She wasn't supposed to wear slacks. But when we come back wearing slacks and we'd worked in a plant, we were sort of not respected as much as we should. There was just not much said about the Rosies for a long time. And finally, it built up again that people got to realizing what we really did. And if it hadn't been for the women working, we would have been lost to war, because we were in a bad shape at that time. And they all just stepped in there to do everything they can. President Roosevelt said, "You women get your aprons off and get out of the kitchen," said, "This is everybody's war." And it was. Everybody sacrificed to get through it. But we didn't realize that what we were really doing, but we really went in there and worked hard and did what we could. We were trying to get them all back home and get that over with as soon as we could.
Tell me what you do now with meeting the embassy and what Summersville does.
A couple of years ago, the people from the Netherlands, when I went to school, we called it Dutch and Holland, but they changed it to Netherlands. But the people from the Netherlands, they realized what the people from the United States had done for them. And Germany had taken over the Netherlands, and they had told them what all they would do for them, but they were starving them to death. And some of the planes flew in, and they had a big field that they made an X in, and they dropped food down in that field for the people there. And about a couple of years ago, some of them came to our embassy, to their embassy in Washington, D.C. They wanted to honor the women that had helped build the planes. Of course, the plane I built wasn't one of the ones that flew in the food. I worked on a little fighter plane, the Corsair, that landed on the aircraft carrier that the wings folded up. I helped rivet those wings on. But they came to Washington, D.C., the ambassador and some of them came to Washington, D.C., to the embassy, and we went there. I think there were about 14 Rosies, and we had people with us, our friends, and they were honoring there, and they planted a pink dogwood tree. That's in honor of the Rosies. They planted a pink dogwood tree there for us, and different times, a lot of them are still planting pink dogwood trees. But about a month later, the King and the Queen came, and they came to the Arlington Cemetery. They laid a wreath at the unknown soldier's grave, and they had all the bands from the Army and the Navy and Air Force were all playing for us, and they were some of us there. And I think they had about 7 or 8 women and about that many men, and each one of us could have one escort with us. So after they laid the wreath at the unknown soldier's grave, we went back in the memorial building, and we got to meet the King and the Queen. And I was in line, the first one to shake hands with them when they came by, and I thought, what do you say to a king? And when I spoke to him, I said, told him what my name was and where I worked during World War II. And then his wife was standing by him, and I'm a hugger. And I looked at her and I said, I'm a hugger, but I know better than to hug a queen. She came right in again to me and said, you can hug me. They were real sweet. I think they said they had 3 children at home, but they were really nice. They were very just common people. But we enjoyed that. About a month later, I found a picture on my front porch that had been sent from the embassy, showed a picture of me shaking hands with the King and Queen, hanging on the wall here, one of the ones on the wall behind me.
Wow.
That was an experience for us. They were very nice.
Yeah, I
They're
bet.
We have a lady here in Summersville, Ann Montague, that has worked with this and set up, she calls it Thanks Plain and Simple. She's trying to get a hold of all the women that worked in plants. If you worked in a plant, you were a Rosie. But if you worked on a plane or you riveted, you were a Rosie the Riveter. So he tries to get them all, but there's not many of us left. You see every few days you see in the paper where another one has passed away, and there's not too many of us left. But it was a great experience for us, especially for a little country girl who'd never been anywhere and done anything. But it was a great experience for us.
Have you got another question from Mozilla?
The other question is, I think you started to answer it already, is do you think that, did you feel empowered as a woman in general? Do you think there was like that had a positive effect on emancipation and empowerment of women during that time?
We were very humble at that time. We didn't put ourselves up or feel like we were doing anything extraordinary or we wasn't above anybody else. We were just very humble people, and everybody just seemed like that they just like one family. You just get in together. We in the plant where we worked, we had a lot of midgets, and they could get in places we couldn't get in. And they were small where they could get in those places that other people couldn't get in. And they were just, they were grandfathers and grandmothers and aunts and uncles and just all age people, anybody in there, anyone that could work and wanted to, had a job. And of course, there was so many men gone, all the boys and the girls, and they'd written a song about the boys that was left, said, they're either too young or too old, or either too green or too gray or too grassy green. What's good's in the army, what's left can never harm me. I'm finding it easy to stay good as gold. They're either too young or too old. But most of them, the ones that wasn't, most of them, when they got out of high school, they had to go into service. And if they were supporting their family, if somebody had a family and supporting their family, they were exempted. But most of the boys that were able, once they got out of high school, they knew they were headed for service. And you didn't know when they left. You're seeing all your friends going. You didn't know when they left is coming back or not, which a lot of them didn't. But we were just kept them on our mind and kept trying to get them back home.
Mozilla, can I ask you, what was the influence that working in that factory had on the rest of your life? You know, you went into an industry that had very few or perhaps no women in it previously. How did that experience set you up for your future years?
How did working in the plant set you up for the rest of your life, your future years?
Well, it let us know that we could work and that we had the ability to do those things. And we knew that we didn't have to sit back and do the grub work as much. Of course, it was an important job, but we had to leave some of that for somebody else and let us go on to other things we found out we could do. They said we liberated the women because at that time, none of them went to work in plants, but a lot of them did. From then on, they knew that they could work in those plants and do those things. And a lot of the women just took over with a lot of work. And in ways it was good, and in ways that you see odds and ends in different ways of it. But I think it was great. It was good. It was great for you. It made you think you didn't have to step back and do like a slave, do slave work, that you could do these other things.
So after the war, when the men who'd been deployed returned, what did the women in the factory do? Did you go back to where you'd come from, or did anyone stay? What were your options at that point?
Well, you know, I had quit about a couple months before the war was over, but I was told with friends that were there that the girls were just walking the street hunting for something to do to keep from having to go back to. A lot of them didn't have a job or anything to go back to. And a lot of them were farm girls that had never been out in places like that. And it was sad for them. A lot of them didn't have anything to go back to, and it was really sad for them. But I had gone back a couple months ahead, and I didn't even ask for a job. They just sent for me to come back where I'd been before. Did I want to work? And they put me back in the same industry, but of course it was in a different place.
Right. Francesco, I understand you've got some questions for Mozilla as well. perhaps about her time in the factory working on those planes that was such an important part of the war effort.
Yeah, exactly. Nice to meet you, Moselle. So my question is, did you really know back then how your work was important for the war?
No, we really didn't. And when we were working in those plants, they let you know that you didn't have any business knowing what the other person was doing in another station. You did your work, but everything was so secret. I would have loved to have had a camera in there and took some pictures that I could have kept with me, later to saying, but you weren't allowed. They looked in your purse as you went in, checked on you as you went in, and they checked on you as you come out. I have my manual that they gave me when I went in. And
hold it up for us, Ms.
Amazing. Yeah, exactly.
I wrote all my fractions and things where we were cutting the metal. We had to know the metal and to know the rivets and
That's
cut
amazing.
the metal. And then I have one thing there where I went 6 months without missing a day's work. And they had given me a card for that. That's just a picture of me when I was there.
That's amazing. Yeah.
But this was for our sheet metal. And where's that one? Oh, there. These are, we had to know the width of our metal and what it was and how long the rivet was, and make sure that this side of the rivet was bucked. You had to have somebody driving the rivet on one side. And so we'd get on that cockpit. One of them would be in the cockpit, somebody out on the wing, and they'd be driving the rivet through. The one in the cockpit would be bucking it, and the one on the outside would be driving it through. So you had to work together with a bucker. And anytime you ruined the rivet, you had to drill it out and make it over. And I made these two little ones that I had made before. We had to, what we worked on was the scraps from the other planes. They had 4 plants there in Ohio, and each one made a different plane. And where we worked on the scraps that was thrown up when we were learning. We had to work on the scraps from the other planes. And the rivets we worked with were swept up off of the floor, and they were put on a big table, all different size rivets, put on a big table, and they had a board around that table to keep them rolling off. And that was one of the things you had to do, is to sit and measure those rivets and measure your material and make sure you had enough rivet to go through that material and enough left on I think it was maybe 5/8 of an inch left on the other side to bucket. So it would come down, have something there to bucket with. And if you messed one up, then, like I say, you had to drill it out and do it over. But those two little things I made, and out of scrap rivets and things that we had. But those rivets would be piled up on a table in a heap in all different sizes. And you had to know the size rivet you was going to use and how wide, how thick your material was, and everything to do it out. We didn't have any computers or any little thing. You had to figure that out in your head.
Yeah, of course.
And on 8th grade education, I just had 8th grade education, but we knew a lot then about stuff like that. And you learned a lot on the farm, doing things and how to do it and everything.
That's amazing.
So and you learned, I was in a family of 10, you learned how to get along with people.
So, Mozilla, I'm interested to know, you had some training when you began, but it sounds like there was a lot of information to take in. You needed to know about the widths and the thicknesses of these metals, about riveting, about how to work, about what to do. Were there ever any injuries at the plant? Was it a safe place to work? Did you feel that it was that everything there was nice and safe, or were there sometimes injuries or accidents?
I don't remember of any accident where we were. They were small accidents. They had a place there. I had a doctor and a nurse's station and everything there, check up on you. If you got something in your eye, you could go and they would take care of it for you. Lots of times you get a little sore throat, you go and they'd spray your throat and put you back out in the assembly line. It was just a big building, and we were working on the assembly line. And when that part of the plane that we worked on came down into our station, we all lit on it because we had to get it done before it got out of the station and went on down below to the next one. But we tried to, when it had come along, and then every rivet, they were inspectors, every rivet had to be inspected before it would pass our station. And we had overseers to see it. And most all the people that were inspecting, most all the inspectors at the rivets were all the women. The women had parts in it too, just all of it. But a lot of the men worked there. Of course, the men were all older.
So we've got some questions from people who are watching this at home. And in particular, they're really interested in the room that you're sitting in. Can you tell us about the toy that's sitting over your shoulder? There's a small Rosie the Riveter toy behind you. That's the one. What can you tell us about this?
My friend here brought me that. We had to keep our hair tied up. Of course, this one don't have anything on the back of her head. It all had to be tied up. And you always watch to see that you didn't get your hair caught in any material or any machines or anything. Of course, we didn't use the big riveting guns with the working like I did on those little pieces. We had the smaller, like the drills that we have today. But we had to keep, and our clothes had to be loose. We had to wear slacks, and our clothes couldn't be loose because I was afraid of getting them caught in machinery or anything. There's restrictions on what we could wear. You didn't wear long sleeves because your long sleeve might get caught in a machine or something. And you had to wear, and keep your hair tied up. Always when you went in, you opened your purse for them to look in your purse when you went in, and you opened your purse when you came out for them to look at your purse. They never went down in and searched in your purse, but they'd look in it as you went by. And there's always buses out there every night for us to ride home in. I worked the evening shift all the time, and they didn't stop when they got the seats full. They filled that bus till everybody could stand in the aisles, one against another, as many people as they could get to stand in the aisle, all the way from the back to the front before the bus moved. And they'd take us downtown, and we'd have to either walk or catch another bus for where we were going to.
It sounds like the plant really took care of you while you were there. They provided the transport, they had a nurse and a doctor on site, and it was a safe place to work. Did you enjoy it as well? How was the morale and the feeling amongst the other employees while you were there?
Most of it was a good morale going around. Everybody got along with people. I didn't see any fussing or any contrariness or anything like that. And around where I was, everybody just jovial and just seemed like they were glad to be working and doing as much as they could to help the country.
And on the wall behind you, I can see various certificates and things. Are they related to your work with Thanks Plain and Simple?
Your certificates.
Those are all different places and different things. After I came back, after my husband died, and I came to Summersville in 1987, I volunteered in a nursing home for years. And a lot of those certificates are from where I was volunteering for nursing homes and different things that I did. And then some of them are from the governor, and some of them are from different places. And the men here, the veterans, even accepted me into their veterans organization. And even today, when they have their parades and everything, I'm one of the ones that are in the parade. With last year, they had a potato festival here in Summersville. So I rode in a fire truck. I was in a fire truck riding for the potato festival. 2 or 3 years ago, I was the parade. I was the head of the parade. What's it called? You
were at the head of the parade.
Yeah, I led the parade.
The maid of honor. I don't think that's the right term, but we understand. You were leading it.
Potato festival. whatever they call
Guest
it.
of honor. Mhm.
Yeah. I'm having, my throat gets dry.
That's okay. Would you like to take a moment to have a drink? So, we're here today with the Rosies, who were a critical part of the US war effort. When the US entered the Second World War, many of the men there joined the Army, the Marine Corps, the Navy, and the Air Force, and they were deployed overseas. And that left the industries, the shipyards, the airplane building factories, the railways, all of those places needed people to work in them. So an enormous workforce of women, and very young women often, stepped up to take the place of the people who had been there previously. And keep in mind that they had no experience in these industries at the time, and they were taking the places of people who had sometimes worked there for many, many years. It was a really interesting part and a really critical part of the war effort, but it also changed the society that we know as the US today in many ways. So women learnt new skills, they moved from the countryside to the city, and they were also able to experience industries that perhaps they might never have been able to have a look at before. At the end of the war, Mozilla, what were your expectations? Do you think they changed after your experiences in Akron?
Now, but when we came back, we just dropped back into where we were, or whatever we did. We weren't any more respected than anyone else, and no one held us up to that we had done anything special. It was just a job that we worked just like you'd be doing to anybody else, and it was just not talked about much, especially the women. It wasn't talked about the women working much. It was usually whatever the soldiers did and everything, which we were just thankful to be able to do it. There were so many people we were working with. Maybe they had a son or a brother. I didn't have any of my immediate family in the war at that time. I had cousins, but not at that time, none of my immediate family. But we were working with people that had sons and women that had husbands in there, and everybody just helped everybody else out.
So Europe Remembers is a project that focuses on Europe. And at the end of this week, on Friday, a lot of countries here will mark VE Day, Victory in Europe Day. But I understand that in the US, VJ Day is probably more significant. And that's the day that the war officially ended. What can you remember about the end of the war?
What can you remember about the end of the war?
Well, everybody celebrated. They were just, everybody was just so happy and wondering, the war's over now, when can they get home? That's what we were looking for, the boys to get back home and all of them to be back. And of course, they didn't all come at once. We'd have a lot of different celebrations where this one would get home and that one would get home.
And when you returned to the farm where your family were, had it changed while you were away?
Well, it wasn't too much different, I didn't think. You just went back in where you left off, and it just didn't seem too much different than what it was before.
And I think we have another question from one of our participants now.
Another question. Someone's going to ask another question.
Right. So tell us about some of your work with Thanks Plain and Simple. What is it that you do with the other Rosies for Thanks Plain and Simple?
We just try to, and just our leader, Ann Monaco, is just trying to get the message out to the people to let them know what the women did at that time, because her mother was a Rosie, And she wants them to people to understand the part that the women had during World War II, how they stepped in to help with them and help to win the war and the things that they did. And we just appreciate them all very much. And we feel blessed to be able to have done those things that we did.
You ring bells on Labor Day.
Hmm.
You ring the bells on Labor Day.
And Ann started this ring a bell for the Rosies. And on Labor Day, at 1 o'clock on Labor Day, she said, everybody ring a bell for the Rosies. So last year at our little pavilion here in town, the big congregation got together and we all had our bells over there. The fire truck was there, and at 1 o'clock, that fire truck started letting off its siren, and everybody ringing their bells for the Rosies for so many seconds that you rang that bell for the Rosies. So that was sort of a celebration we had over there. I had a lot of the memento that I had here on the table. We enjoyed it. They do celebrate the Rosies all around and try to do things that way to let people know that they did have a part in the World War II.
Well, we really appreciate you being here today to share your story with us, and the contribution of the Rosies and also the work that you've done with Thanks Plain and Simple is of interest to us and also to the people who are watching at home. So we'd like to say thank you again, and we wish you a very pleasant day.
You're welcome. Glad to do it.
It was lovely to meet you. Thank you. So for people who are joining us from home, we'll be back in 10 minutes. We're going to have a short break. But in the meantime, be sure to go to europeremembers.com. You can create a Europe Remembers logo. And if you have any photographs or stories or mementos from the Second World War and you'd like to post them online with a memory, we would really love to see those. Use hashtag #IRemember or Europe Remembers, and we'll make sure that we're able to share those with the people that are here speaking with us today, as well as with others. Many thanks. Scott? Hi, welcome back to Europe Remembers. This is the second day of a week-long series of conversations that we're having with World War II veterans and witnesses. Witnesses are people who remember the war, and the veterans are from the services that were a part of the operations in Europe. We're really pleased to be joined by more than 20 people who remember the war and can provide first-hand accounts. They're from 7 different countries, they speak multiple languages, and they're here with us today interacting with participants and other people from around the world as well. If you'd like to take part or submit a question, you can do that using the comment function on YouTube or Facebook, and you can still sign up or register for a one-on-one conversation with one of our World War II witnesses on europeremembers.com. We'd also like to thank our partners and the members of the Liberation Route Europe Foundation who have been instrumental in helping bring together this project and all of the wonderful people that we've got here today. You can also post your own memories about the Second World War or stories about your family members or people that you admire using the hashtag #IRemember or hashtag #EuropeRemembers. I'm really pleased to be able to introduce you to Paul Grassy. Paul is from Savannah in Georgia on the US East Coast, and he was a pilot in the 8th Air Force. He's also an author who's written a book that was based on his experiences during the Second World War. If you're in the market for a new book, this is one that we can highly recommend. The proceeds go to a museum that Paul is actively involved with, and we're going to talk about that a little more later. And the book itself is based on the stories about 6 of his buddies in the Air Force and the experiences they had. It's funny, it's touching, it's a really good read in all of the right ways, and I'm really pleased to be able to introduce Paul. How are you, Paul?
Yes, how are you? Can you hear me now?
I sure can.
I need you a little bit louder. Go ahead.
So, Paul, the team or the group of people that you flew with in the Air Force are known as the Mighty Eighth. Can you tell us a bit about the Mighty Eighth?
Mighty Eighth was a great Air Force. And after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and we declared war on them, and then in a couple of days, Germany declared war on us. And the 8th Air Force, Roosevelt had a meeting in his cabinet. And he said, we only have 58 airplanes that can fly. And he said, we need 50,000 just to beat Germany. So he called in people like Edsel Ford, build the B-24s. I was a B-24 pilot in World War II. I was in the 8th Air Force. The 8th Air Force became a tremendous factor. In the beginning, the Germans were great pilots, fighter pilots, and so on. And we were learning the ropes. A bunch of us just got out of high school in 1941. And I know how the RAF, I'll talk about the RAF in a minute. but we learned how to fly formation. We lost 54,000 young men trying to become pilots in World War II. And also, when back when Eaker, E-A-K-E-R, the general, he was sent to England to build 100 airfields. And those 100 airfields were all the same, pretty much all the same. 3 runways, 2 short ones, and 1 long one about 6,000 feet. So as we went through training, we got better and better at the game of war. And we actually, I only had 250 hours flying time when I had to fly the Atlantic solo in a B-24. I got my plane at Mitchell Field with my crew, and we went up to Dowfield, Maine, and we waited because there was a huge snowstorm. So we went to Goose Bay, Labrador, and it was about 40 feet of snow on the sides of the runways, and it was freezing cold, close to 45 below. And I had to leave that night to fly to England and get I was on orders, me and my crew. And it was freezing cold. They changed at the last minute because there was a 100-mile-an-hour tailwind. They figured we could go all the way to England. I like to say Lindbergh had a better shot.
This is something that people are really very interested in, both the B-24s and the 8th Air Force. And we've got Ruth, who's joining us from the UK, and she'd like to ask you some questions about what it was like. Go ahead, Ruth.
Yeah, the war, it's when we were over in combat, is that what you're talking about?
You can ask.
Whatever.
Say hello. Say hello.
Hi.
Say it louder. Say hello.
Hi. How are you, son?
Good, thanks. How high did the plane fly?
Yes, speak louder.
I'm going to have my...
How high did the plane fly?
Good question. B-17s could fly about 30,000 feet. The B-24 that I flew, the ceiling was 23,000 feet, which was a real disadvantage.
Oh, that's why did you choose to be a pilot?
What else would you like to know?
Before you ask your next question, could you perhaps just tell us your name?
Finley.
My name?
Paul.
Grassy.
This is Finley. He's joining us from the UK, and he's got another question for you.
Why did you choose to become a pilot?
Yes, I was a pilot.
Why did you choose
B-24?
Being a pilot.
Pardon?
Why a pilot?
Why? Because I wanted to. I wanted to fly the airplane. And when we were going through training, we had to go to a place to decide what you were going to be. And they gave us tests, navigators, bombardiers, and pilots. And the navigators used to say, "We're smarter than the pilots." And I used to tell them, "We have more coordination." But you had some great pilots. What country are you from, son?
England.
The UK.
Great. Hey, the RAF was terrific. I just want to tell you a little story. How can I do that?
Please.
This is about England. Do you know where Dunkirk is?
Yeah. No, Dunkirk is in
Dunkirk, France. Let me tell you, I went to the 75th reunion in Normandy last June, and we went to Dunkirk. And your prime minister during the war Winston Churchill decided after the battle in Dunkirk in the area in France there, he decided that the RAF performed greatly, very well in the battle against the Luftwaffe. And he also decided to take 600,000 people back to England, including, of course, military of 250,000 and the rest were civilians. And Churchill then, about a month later when they left, the RAF, he decided could beat. He was probably the only one in England who decided they could beat the Luftwaffe. And he had it figured out that the Germans would have to go back and refuel all the time. You know, they could only stay in combat for about 10 minutes over London. They had to go back to France to get fuel. And he figured they'd run out of oil and fuel. And they did. And the RAF performed brilliantly, and that was the Great Battle of Britain, probably one of the greatest and most important air battles in World War II. Just thought he should know that.
Is there anything else you'd like to ask, Finley, while you've got the chance?
Did you enjoy flying?
Did you enjoy flying?
Do I still fly?
No.
Did you enjoy flying?
Oh, I did, yeah. I'm 97 now. I'm afraid I'll get flying for the last time pretty soon.
Oh.
But we were loved flying. You see, we got better and the Germans got worse. And after there was a great air raid, which we performed. It's called Black Thursday. It was the second raid on the ball bearing factories and Schweinfurt. And we lost 100 planes. That was 1,000 crew members on one mission. However, after we got the P-51 Mustang
Yeah.
at the end of 1943. And guess what? We killed 12,000 German pilots for the rest up until the invasion.
Wow.
We were in control. We had a better airplane, and we also were getting better at our job. So I thought you might enjoy that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Finley.
You're welcome.
So, Paul, we have someone else here who'd like to speak to you. We have Lisa, who's from Germany and has some questions.
Okay, great.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi, Lisa.
How are you?
Hello.
How are you?
Oh, I'm fine, thanks. How are you?
Oh, Lisa, I'm sorry.
That's fine.
The old guy can't hear too well anymore.
No, don't worry about it.
How am I?
Yeah, how are you?
Good.
That's good.
Pretty good.
That's good.
And but I really enjoy speaking with you.
Oh, thanks.
You have any
Why?
questions?
Oh, yeah. My question is why you felt like it was your duty to join the Air Force.
Why did I go into the Air Force?
Yes.
Yeah. My brother was 6 years older than me. And on Pearl Harbor Day, we didn't know it, the Japanese were going to raid Pearl Harbor. And my brother took me up after church. He said, "Come on, I'm going to teach you how to fly, kid." I was 18 and he was 24. We landed, turned on the radio, and found out that the Japs had bombed Pearl Harbor. See, we didn't know him by any other name, excuse me, but that was the way we called him. But anyhow, 90 days later, he had 60 hours flying time. He was sent to Memphis Air Station. He was a Navy pilot. And he had to teach Navy pilots how to fly with only 60 hours flying time. And that's why I was telling about my trip across the Atlantic, because we made a big mistake. We almost ran out of fuel. But I really enjoyed flying. I thought our fighter pilots were terrific. So were yours in the RAF. A fighter pilot has to be a real kind of a little crazy guy. I mean, those guys have to perform doing, imagine being in combat and have to do a loop or a spin out or a chandelle. We didn't have to do that. But what we had to do as a bomber pilot was really learn how to fly formation. And we got good at that. We had to fly very tight. Sometimes we would fly formation. If you were a good formation pilot, I felt I was, maybe 5 feet from the wing on the plane you were flying on, and guys are shooting at you. It's pretty tough. Would you like to hear what I had to do on VE Day, since Friday is VE Day?
Yeah, go on.
Would you like that?
Yes, please.
I was in London on VE Day. And the Germans had surrendered on May 8th. You're from Germany?
Yes,
what
I am.
City? Where?
The West.
What'd you say?
Erndl.
Oh, okay. I was in London on a 60-hour pass, and the place went crazy. The lights went on for the first time in 6 years. Everybody was happy, the Brits. Me and my buddies weren't that excited. We were kind of glad that we were finished in Germany. However, we still had to go to Japan. And I was on my way to learn how to fly B-29s and learn how to fly and also get ready to lead the invasion into Japan. So we still had a lot of work to do. But I want to tell you, on the way, President Truman decided it was okay to drop the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So we never did get the B-29 training because the war ended, which was a tremendous thrill. But the Americans, see, we were pretty young. We were just out of high school. We didn't get to go to college, a lot of us. 2 million of us went to college. And I got my degree from Lafayette College in Easton, Pennsylvania. And everybody was wearing uniforms. We didn't even have clothes to wear, you know. We were using our clothes from the military. But it was great. We were able to rebuild America. And guess what?
Would you like to ask Paul about some of his experiences during the war?
Yeah, so do you have like any good memories of the time you like fought in Europe?
Give me a hand.
Do you have any memories of the time you fought in Europe?
What are the best and happiest memories that you have, Paul?
Oh, the best and happiest memories. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I want to tell you about 2 very terrible air raids that I was on. One of them was after the Germans got the Me-262, the jets, And 23 of them, and my buddies and I were flying from my group, the 446th in England, and in the 8th Air Force. And we got taken away from the main formation. And we went towards 2 factories that were building Me-262s. And before we got there, somebody yelled, "There's bandits in the area." There were 12 Me-262s attacking us, only 24 of us. However, what had happened, the German aces had long gone at that point, and we were able to shoot down, my crew shot one down, and then we shot 6 down out of the 12.
So that's a very successful flying mission. Is that one of the things that you were particularly proud of at the time? And what were the things that you experienced that you look back on and you remember with joy and pride?
Oh, my friends. You grew to really have buddies because you lived together, you fought together, and you know, that war ended in 3.5 years. Pretty good. We got better at our jobs. And right now, you might be interested to know that for 72 years, 75 years, I've been trying to get the Medal of Honor that happened the day after I just described. On a terrible rainy day, my buddy he disappeared. I never heard from him. I was supposed to meet him that night, and excuse me, we did hit a few pubs that night when we got home, but you know, you didn't know whether you're going to live the next day or not in those days. But we got caught in a terrible storm, and they called the mission off. And let me say one thing. You never know how you're going to react in a life or death situation until you do, until whatever happens to you. Fortunately, you know, we were young. We were only 21 years old, and you think you could beat anything when you're 21 years old. But we had to get better at our game so we could compete with the champions at that time, the Luftwaffe. And we got better at our game.
So Lisa, I think 2021 is probably around your age. Is there anything that you've experienced that has reminded you of the Second World War, or that you would like to ask Paul about?
I mean, it's
I
not.
didn't catch. Yeah, go ahead.
It hasn't really happened to me, but like, I just want to know, like, from your point of view now, would you change any of your decisions you did during that time?
I didn't hear a question.
Would you change any of the decisions you made during that time?
Would I like to change decisions?
Would you change any of your decisions that you made during that time?
Yeah, a couple of them. I think that you had to be lucky. Combat was lots of luck, 95%. So the only thing in those days, the reason we got through the war is our buddies. We didn't want them to think we were cowards. So we did things that never, we never, we thought about it, but we always took the route to try and win. Because bad things happen to a lot of people who made bad decisions. And, it's kind of like on the battlefield, if you were in a foxhole, the guy with you better have the same kind of courage that you have, if you have any, because you could crack in a second. You know what I'm saying?
One of the ways that courage and bravery in the Second World War is remembered and commemorated with the awards that people receive. And I understand that you've received the Legion of Honor, which is the highest award for merit that France gives out. Can you tell us about the story behind that, please?
About the one that's on me?
That's right. Yes,
the
please.
Medal?
Tell us about
it. The French Medal of Honor?
Yeah.
Yeah. I used to fly over Normandy all the time, and pilots were in a different game than the poor guys that were down there on Omaha Beach. And we earned this because we put our lives on the line to free France, to give them freedom. And it was a thrill to get this award because, a lot of us earned it, except in different ways. Some guys were paratroopers. Some guys, jumped on D-Day. And some of us were airmen. And right now I'm on the board of the mighty 8th Air Force in Pooler, Georgia, Savannah. That's where I live. And we had I got the award there. They gave it to the French, signed by the French president. I did get to shake his hand too. I was in the audience at Omaha Cemetery, Omaha Beach, last June. And I got to shake his hand. President Trump was, he was too far away. He was about 10 yards away. I couldn't get to him with too many people. But
never mind about that one, but perhaps you could tell us about the book that you've written. I understand you've written a book called It's Character That Counts. And it's a book that supports a really important organization, which is the Museum of the Mighty Eighth. Is that right? What was the inspiration for writing the book? How did it come about?
Good question. I was on the board. I am on the board there. At a board meeting, we had decided to do an initiative. And I always wanted my 6 pals. We were very close in high school, grammar school. And we have a program here for the schools. We were told that day, I was in the meeting, that the initiative was going to be a program called It's Character That Counts. Actually, it was Character Counts. And I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden I said, rather than an exhibit for my buddies, they had all died. I want to leave them something, so I'm going to write a book. And I had never tried it. And I wanted to write a book about character because my buddies, I felt, could fit anything. All of them. They were great guys. We played ball together and so on. And I did. I sold a couple thousand books. I still am selling books about them.
The book
about
has
what they did in the war.
The book has excellent reviews, and I understand that it's a very amusing book, and also one that really moves people. It has outstanding reviews. Can you tell us, please, what were the names of your 6 buddies, the men you wrote about in the book?
I'd love to tell you that. My first, I'll quickly tell you what happened. We were just out of high school, 1941, and the war was raging all over the world. And we were at this big house, very wealthy guy up in New Jersey. And his name was Bill Dolan. We didn't know what he had done. So we're sitting there and I said, hey, Mr. Dolan, you think we ought to enlist? 6 of us. And he said, I can't answer that question for you, but let me show you something. He went upstairs, came down, and showed us pictures of him in World War I. This man was between 55 and 60. He had been a pilot in the Lafayette Escadrille with Eddie Rickenbacker and the French Newport and so on, and the SPAD. And he told us about and had pictures of having gone through the aviation school in France and everything. And he fought with the Lafayette Escadrille. So anyhow, next Sunday we came back and we're really serious now about getting in the service. My buddies and me, and the 2 twins, his step-sons, they were in the 9th Air Force. They were captains. They said, wait till you see the old man. And he was a little past 55. And he walked in the room and he had his uniform on, his wings, and so on. He said, I'm leaving Tuesday. You guys can make up your own mind. He enlisted. So we all enlisted. So my buddy, who was a prisoner of war with the Germans, he flew in the B-17. He was a tail gunner. I made him trustworthy and told his story. Then I took the second guy, who was Pop Dolan. He had become an intelligence officer for the 8th Air Force and flew 9 missions at close to 60 without any fighter cover because he wanted to find out what his guys were going through, the young guys. Then the other one, the third one, was my roommate at Virginia Tech for a couple semesters. His name was Bob Haldane. I got called up for the Air Corps, and he got drafted for the infantry about a month later. They called him back to West Point, and during the Vietnam War, he became a general, and he wound up a lieutenant general, who spent 40 years in the service. The next guy was Fairness, and he was a fighter pilot in the Navy, F-6F, greatest athlete that ever went to our high school. I called him Fairness, 2 of them. And he said he got killed flying an F-6F. Great. 5 major league teams were trying to sign him. The other guy that I made Fairness was a guy named Don McCullough. Don had joined the Marines, and he was on the flotilla when Jimmy Doolittle took off to bomb Tokyo after we had been bombed by the Japanese. And he then went in the infantry, and he was wounded in the Battle of Okinawa. And about a year ago was his birthday, his 98th. And his children asked me to talk to him. We were great friends. And I called him. He had had dementia for 32 years. Doesn't know what's happened. Walk around the backyard. Lived to almost be 100. And he was a great Marine. And another buddy, and I want to tell you, I selected caring.
Mm-hmm.
I want to tell you why. You've heard my son Terry in here helping me.
We have. Hello, Terry.
Dad, pardon? Terry's dad, his biological dad, he never met him. And he was on General Patton's staff, his dad. And his father was killed at San Lo during the invasion. He also was in the African invasion before that. He's a great soldier, a major, and he was only 24 years old. And I married Terry's mother, and he and I have been son and dad for 73 years. He takes care of me now. I took care of him.
That's possibly the best kind of caring that there is. So you had respect, honesty, fairness, caring, and what was the last one, please, Paul?
The last one? One of my guys? Yeah. I had me. The two twins.
You went trustworthy. You haven't mentioned.
Pardon?
Trustworthy.
Trustworthy. The Pop Dolan was respect, which I think we need today.
Trustworthiness, respect.
The third was trustworthiness. And the fourth was fairness.
Fairness. And then we have caring.
We have 50, then mine was caring, and then the citizenship for the twins. They were very successful in the political area. And, but I really was pleased that you asked that question, because incidentally, I'll send you a book.
We love that. It's a very good book, and I'm looking forward to reading it. So caring and citizenship are absolutely things that we need more of at the moment. And I'd really like to thank you, Paul, for your example of those character traits, those values that you embody and that you write about in your book. I'd also like to thank some of the people who have been with us and who have watched you today, in particular, Jeannot, Yoren and Barry, who submitted questions, and to everybody who's watching. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back in 1 minute for more of Europe Remembers. Hi, welcome back to Europe Remembers. Today we've heard from Ruth and Moselle, who were both Rosies, a part of the extraordinary effort from US women during the Second World War. We've also heard the stories of Paul Grassy, who was a pilot in the 8th Air Force, the Mighty 8th, and flew B-24 bombers over Europe. Next, we have Buck Marsh. Buck is from Alabama, and he was part of the 36th Armoured Infantry Regiment. He fought in the Battle of the Bulge, which was one of the most decisive and key battles of the final stages of the Second World War. The Battle of the Bulge was a counter-offensive from the German forces as they tried to open a line and take Antwerp harbour. Buck was there and he remembers. And if you would like to share your memories, if you have photos, mementos or stories, please add them to Facebook, Instagram or Twitter with the hashtag #IRemember or hashtag #EuropeRemembers. We would love to see them. I'm really pleased to introduce Buck, who's going to tell us more about his experiences, and he'll also be able to talk to people who have questions for him. Buck, how are you?
Doing fine, thank you, ma'am.
It's very nice to see you, Buck. So I understand that you were in the Battle of the Bulge. Can you tell us about that, please?
I was in a replacement depot and transferred to the 36th Armored Infantry on December the 29th, right in the midst of the Bulge. Joined a wonderful outfit. I was glad I joined some people that had been in combat before. It was certainly reassuring, and they taught me a lot. But it was a bitter experience. The snow was eventually got to be 20 or 24 inches deep. And the weather always was around 5 above zero, and sometimes it got below zero. My first experience was combat. Myself and 2 other friends or soldiers were manning a 50 caliber machine gun, and a German tank pulled over the top of a hill, and we were near a haystack. And undoubtedly, the Germans thought there was a tank maybe under that haystack, so they shot through it with an armor-piercing round. The armor-piercing round went through the haystack and severed the leg just below the knee of Sanchez, who was standing within 2 feet of me. And we were able to put a tourniquet on him and get him into the house. The opportune was staying in a nice big German house and sleeping mainly in the barn with the cows, but it kept us warm. And then later...
Warmth, something sounds like it was certainly not plentiful at that time. One person who can really, who has some questions for you and who knows about that part of Europe very well and who actually comes from there is Karan Tong. He's with us next, and he'd like to ask you some things about those days.
Hi, do you hear me?
You can.
That's a great honor, sir. Yeah, my first question is, because I come from Belgium, I was born in the Bulge. And my grandparents have some great memories of your action to liberate the cities in Belgium. My first question is, what was your feeling about your contacts with civilians? And do you have some funny facts about that? When you liberate the cities or villages before and during the Battle of the Bulge?
What was it like?
Yeah.
How were your interactions with the civilians in Belgium?
Belgium, yeah. or in other place if you?
Well, we were in France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and of course Germany.
Yeah.
But nobody treated us nearly as well as the Belgian people. They were just lovely. They moved out of the house and let us in it, or they made room for us. And I'll never forget one afternoon, it was bitter cold, it was a blizzard, and one of my buddies and I was standing guard. The rest of the platoon was in the house. And in the midst of that blizzard, the lady that owned the house, the Belgian lady, had a shawl around her head. She came out and brought us hot chicken soup in a mug. And the snow was blowing sideways. It was horrible. But I believe that cup of soup may have been the best meal I have ever had. It was so good. And then we were on duty 2 hours, and then went back in the house and had a chance to thank her for that. And as you know, when the Germans attacked, they had camouflage uniforms that were well equipped for the snow, whereas we were not equipped at all. And later, I was one of 4 selected to go on a reconnaissance patrol and see if we could find where the Germans were. We went up to headquarters. They told us to go out in front of our main line of resistance about 500 yards, and we would encounter a sunken road. Get in that sunken road and go about 3/4 of a mile to a gate, go through that gate, top of the hill, and just sit and listen. Well, we had on olive drab overcoats. You could see us for a mile. But the Belgian people had given us sheets to use for camouflage. And people back in re-echelon had sewed a hood on them and tied them around our waist and our arms. One of the guys that helping me with my sheet and camouflage kept laughing. I was smiling. And I said, what's the funny? This is a hell of a mess. We fix to go behind the German lines. Why are you smiling? He said, look behind you. And I had about 4 feet of that sheet trailing me. I looked like a bride coming down the aisle. But we got in that sunken road and we had gone maybe halfway to the gate, and we could hear people approaching. We were down in the road, and up here was a bank about 4 feet high with all kind of thickets growing on it. A German patrol, a combat patrol, there's about 25 or 30 of them. They were knocking icicles off. We could hear that, so we just laid down in the snow, which was real deep in that sunken road, with our camouflage outfit on. And the Germans they were within 7, 8 feet of us, and they all went by and encountered our main line of resistance where we had machine guns dug in, and a pretty bad battle took place. And while that was going on, we continued up the sunken road till we found a place to get out, which we did, and then stayed there. And the German patrol came back the same path they were on, and we all went by. Then we got back in the sunken road and went back to our forces. But
so, Karan Tong, it must be quite nice to hear that Belgium was a really standout memory for Buck, and it also sounds like there were some pretty delicious meals there.
Yeah.
And we all know that the food in the military can certainly be interesting, and the food in Belgium is excellent. So despite being in the middle of winter and in one of possibly the worst battles of the Second World War, the locals were able to share chicken soup and white sheets and a barn. And I wonder if you have any particular relationship or stories about the war that you would like to share with Buck, or ask him about, perhaps.
Well, another thing that happened during the Bulge, we had a 50 caliber machine gun dug in at the rear of a house, probably 30, 40 yards behind it. And we went out there on 2-hour shifts. My buddy and I went out, and as we were going out, we had created a real good path from the house. We met the 2 GIs coming back. They could hear us. We got out to the gun, and the 2 GIs were still there. What it was, the 2 that we met were German soldiers ready to surrender. And they went up to the house, knocked on the door, and a sleepy-eyed GI came and opened the door and like scared him to death. But after my shift was over, we went up and I opened a K ration or C ration, and it was cheese, which I didn't want. So I'd opened it, I just set it over on the table, and the German soldier motioned like that, and I told him to take it. And when he did, he reached down in his boot and pulled out a dagger about 10 inches long with a swastika on it, cut the cheese, and looked at me and smiled, turned the dagger around with the handle toward me and handed me the dagger, which I still have. But it's undoubtedly our soldiers didn't think to search him.
Buck, that is an extraordinary story. Really, that's really something. Karan Tong, have you got another question?
Have a what?
Yeah, it was true during the battles of the Bulge. There was during the Christmas Eve some parties in the farms. So a kind of peace between the American soldiers and German soldiers, because I have witness who told to me that he saw an entire company will give a party in a farm during the Christmas Eve, during the battles of the Bulge. Do you experience something like that, or do you have some experience to share with me, or share with us?
So, Buck, for the people who are listening at home, I think we may have some sound problems, and just let me explain that there were some Christmas parties that Karan Tong's family members held at that time, and a company of Americans was able to visit them, and they joined in one of these Christmas parties. Did you experience anything like that? Do you remember what Christmas was like for you?
I didn't ever experience anything like that at Christmas. I was in the replacement depot, and we had C ration cans tied to a fir tree. That was our Christmas. And we had foxholes pretty close by. That was a buzz bomb alley. But I never did experience any camaraderie with the German soldiers. I've heard about them singing together on Christmas Eve.
All right, Denise has sent us a question. Denise would like to know, what regiment and company were you with in the 36th Division?
I was in the 36th Armored Infantry Regiment, which was an integral part of the 3rd Armored Division. We had 2 regiments of tanks and 1 regiment of infantry. Most of the time, we rode the back of the tanks into battle. And then I was in Company A of the regiment, the 3rd Platoon. Just had some wonderful buddies in that helped me through this. And we dug foxholes, not like you see in the movies. Our foxholes were about a foot deep and 6 feet long and about 4 feet wide for 2 of us to lay down in it. And I had a buddy that I dug hot foxholes with Bob Janicki. He'd received a wound earlier in the war, and the outside of his face was just fiery red and had a puncture. But they sent him back to the line, and I've written an essay about that, and I said in my essay that Bob Janicki wasn't pretty, but he sure was warm. So in that foxhole, you're looking for anything to keep warm. And we were in there during a blizzard. That was the second blizzard that we saw. We saw 2 blizzards while we were there.
How was crossing the Rhine? You crossed the Rhine River, is that right?
That's correct. Well, prior to that, we had quite a big, hard battle in this big city of Cologne. The snipers, German snipers were everywhere, and the debris that up around the Dom Cathedral, that was our goal. And our lieutenant assigned me and 2 other people to take this building, which we did, and it was a little wall left in front of it, and we were kneeling down there looking for the sniper. And the sniper shot one guy on my left, Robert Marsh sees, in the shoulder. We didn't think it was bad, but called for medic. Anyhow, he bled to death while I was trying to hold him up straight. We went back to that same window, which was stupid, and the German killed the other soldier, Richard Bone, shot him through the neck. So, and then we went on to the Dom Cathedral and down to the Rhine, and came back and went into the basement of a building just full of wine, and we got 6 or 7 cases of champagne and put it in a half-track. We went down to Herth, which was on the river, on the western side of the river. The bridge at Remagen had fallen in by then when we got there, but they built a pontoon bridge, and we got in our half-tracks, and one at a time, the half-tracks and the tanks would cross that pontoon bridge, and the tanks, when their tread tracks were about a foot underwater as they went across that thing. They was the heavy. So we crossed that without mishap. The Germans were trying to blow the bridge up, and the engineers were having a time with them, but we got it crossed and built up a bridgehead and got ready to attack the city of Paderborn.
Next, we have a question from Fabio in Austria.
Hello, Buck. How are you?
Just fine, thank you.
I have a question about coming back to civilian life in the United States. I understand that you started a career as an engineer, and what happened with that after the war? How did you adapt to civilian life, and did you pursue your engineering career further?
I didn't have a bit of trouble in the world adapting to civilian life because I wasn't getting shot at. It was pretty nice. But I went to school at TPI, which is Tennessee Tech now, to get my 2 years of engineering. And I wanted to study architecture, and they didn't have an architecture school. So I went to Auburn to study architecture. And they started a new program, building construction. And I switched over after a quarter or 2 of architecture. I switched to building construction. And then upon graduation, Juan and I were married. She graduated in June. I graduated in March, and we were married in August. And that was just a wonderful time in life. And then took me 3 years to get my degree at Auburn, and Wanda got a degree in English at Auburn.
Right.
Did that answer your question? Or not?
Yeah, it did. It did. And another question I have is, you told us that you experienced great friendship and camaraderie during the Battle of the Bulge and in the war in general. How did you keep in touch with your friends afterwards, or how did they adapt to coming back to life in the United States?
Well, we had a Frank Smolik who lived in Chicago, started a newsletter, Company A newsletter. And he kept up with that real well. Then in 1984, we had a company reunion, Company A reunion. And then we would have those, we have them our 39th. We can't have it this year because of the virus. But Juan and I were to be the hosts here in Auburn for that one. And we've hosted 5 of them in Washington, D.C. and Charlottesville and Charlotte. Just everybody picks out where they want to have one. And so we've had 39 reunions.
Wow, that's amazing.
And we still have the newsletter. Right now, when we have our banquet, we usually have maybe 30 people, but we only have 4 Company A members that still come to these. I may be the only ones alive. But then our family, I've got, of course, Wanda and 3 children and a couple of grandchildren that have been to them. And that's true of most everybody that's left. They have their relatives.
Garrett, who's one of our watchers, has a question from you. He asks, where did you get your Purple Heart?
I got it at Meilendorf, Germany. It was a small village, but it had a crossroad there, and it was an important road for our supplies. And we'd taken it twice, and the German soldiers would go back in the woods when we were there, and then they would come back. So we were told to take white phosphorus grenades and just burn the town down. And we went in, and just as we got probably within 40 yards of the ravine, 6 SS troopers came out of there with bazookas and fired at us, and I got a piece of one of those bazookas in my knee. But I went back to where we had an aid station set up, and they pulled it out. It didn't penetrate very far, but they took that out and bandaged it and said, "You're fine to go back up on the line." So I still get 20% disability for that, but I don't have any trouble at all with it. But that's and the SS troopers would not surrender, so it was necessary to kill the 6 of them.
So, Buck, I think we have time for one more question from Fabio.
Yeah, so you started as an engineer, and what was it like being sent to Europe? Because from what I understand, you didn't initially want to go and fight, but then you had to because the soldiers were needed. So what did it feel like to have to go to Europe all of a sudden?
Pretty frightening. I was, after I had basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia, then I was sent to St. John's University to further my education, and we were going to school 10 hours a day and half a day on Saturday to speed up our graduation. But then suddenly the Army disbanded that whole program, ASTP, Army Specialized Training Program, and put all of us back in the infantry due to the losses we'd experienced in Europe. And so I was sent overseas as a replacement. And there was about 200,000 ASTP people. I was the only one in our company, but they were spread out through all of Europe. Luckily, I'd had infantry basic training and had some other training on maneuvers down in Louisiana. But it was pretty bad. I was at St. John's. I was sleeping between two nice sheets and warm, and had radiators and wonderful food in the cafeteria, 10 minutes from Times Square. And then all of a sudden, got on a ship, went to Liverpool, Southampton, to Le Havre, to a replacement depot, and then joined the company in Belgium. So it was quite a shock physically to go from the beds and taken care of to a hole in the ground in Belgium.
I bet.
So I have a question here from Barry. He says, can you tell us about your friendships during the war? What was the feeling of camaraderie like where you were?
Well, our company, our squad especially, developed a real sense of camaraderie. And if anybody got wounded, we made sure that we got them back to the aid station. We had to go out in the field and get them. And an example of the camaraderie that existed, the night that Janik and I were in a foxhole along with the rest of the company, and during this blizzard, and it was 5 below zero, one of our members, Hugh Cannon, who was the most considerate person I've ever known, he drove up through the German lines. He was back in the back with the kitchen equipment people, but he came up with a Jeep and brought probably 100 blankets and a trailer through all of that snow and all. But the camaraderie was just unbelievable. And then when we started having reunions, it was more reflected even at that time. Just a little bit off.
In Europe for VE Day. On May the 8th, we'll be commemorating VE Day, 75 years in Europe. Do you remember what that day was like?
Oh, yes, we were in a little village of Heinstadt, and our squad was in a 2-story house, and everybody had a nice house there. And we had plenty of wine, but my squad, I had liberated a big typewriter like this is in our half track, and my squad got it and swapped it for a case of red wine. So there was quite a bit of partying going on that day. Of course, the biggest party of all was when they dropped the atom bomb, because we was slated to, in fact, as we'd started moving back toward the coast to come back to the United States, train some, and then go to Japan. So when they dropped the bomb and Japan surrendered, that was a great day for celebration. But VE Day was, even the Germans were so glad it was over. There were a few people, SS, Nazi people, but not many. So they joined in with our celebration, VE Day.
And today you go to your reunions. How about some of the celebrations that are held in Europe? Have you been to any of the memorial or the commemorations that are held here?
Yes. In 1999, I was called back to Germany to be made the honorary sergeant major of our regiment. in Friedberg, Germany. So we, my wife went to that. I was there for about 4 days, just prior to Christmas, and then we rented a car. And the snow was about 4 inches deep, and we drove through all the places that I had combat in Belgium, Pravedo. Then we went to Spa and spent the night there. It's the most beautiful snow flakes coming down I've ever seen. And then we just got back from a 8-day trip to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the Bulge. And we were staying in a hotel at Clairvaux, Luxembourg, where we took day trips into Belgium, Bastogne and Stupigny. We had a pretty bad battle there. But I was very flattered. I made a short speech, 8 minutes, and then we had a luncheon, and the King of Belgium sat at my table, and the President of Germany, head of the European Union, the United States Department, the Secretary of Defense. So I was quite flattered to be in their presence. King was very gracious. But have we been another time? I think that's the only times we've been.
Well, those sound like some very special times. Is there any advice that you'd like to give to our viewers or the young people who are here today and who have participated in this conversation with you? What would you like them to know?
Well, that's a terrible experience. I wouldn't want anybody else to ever go through it. Combat is a horrible thing. You're compelled to kill people. You see your buddies slaughtered. And it's just a horrible situation. So what I do is advise the young people of this country to try to get our country back where we are respected throughout the world. We're not right now, and it bothers me greatly that we had 88 men killed in our company, and I think of them quite often, and it bothers me to think that they gave their lives for our country to be in this condition it's in. We've got to make some changes over here and get back back to normal.
Buck, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you today. Thank you for sharing your stories. We're going to take a short break, but if you have stories you'd like to share, please post them online with #EuropeRemembers or #IRemember. Thank you, Buck, and we'll be back in a few minutes.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Europe Remembers. Today and all of this week, we're marking 75 years since some of the most decisive and memorable occasions of the Second World War. We've got conversations from witnesses, people who were in the war and who remember it in vivid detail, as well as recollections from veterans. They're joining us from 7 different countries, and online we also have participants and other people who are here to share their stories and remember. Now we have Vern Oller. Vern was a member of the 29th Infantry Division, which landed on Omaha Beach, one of the 5 beaches of the Normandy beach landings. After D-Day, Vern took part in the crossing of the Saar River, and he has a lot of things that he'd like and that he's able to share with us today. We are running slightly behind schedule, but that's what happens when the memories are this interesting and the stories are captivating. Welcome, Vern. Hello, Vern.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm having a little trouble with my hearing aids, I believe. I'll try to pick it up.
We'll do the best that we can, Vern. Perhaps you could tell us, what are your memories of landing at Omaha Beach?
Omaha Beach.
Well, when we were scheduled to come in about an hour after each hour. Each hour was 6:30 a.m. So we were scheduled for about 7:30. And when we were coming in, we had a little bit of problem that we got hit by artillery, and it knocked out part of our LCVP. So we had to abandon the LCVP, and we were able to hail down a LCM that was on the way back out. And we tied the 2 vehicles together and transferred our equipment. We were in heavy duty mortars. And so we had to transfer all our equipment to the LCM, and then the LCM brought us around and we landed. We probably took us another half hour, 45 minutes and I think it really saved us because things had quieted down a little more on the beach than it would have been with an hour after each hour. So when we landed, we got our equipment in and worked our way back to where we were supposed to be and started firing. And we were supporting the Rangers at Point de Houx and to the left flank, to the right flank, and with the 29th Division. The outfit I was in was the 81st Chemical Mortar Battalion. It was a 4.2 mortar, and it was a very accurate piece. So we were in demand just about everywhere. And we finished out the day. We went up the hill, and later, in early afternoon, we were able to get up that hill. And then we set up our mortars up on top of the hill and began firing up there. The infantry was only a couple hundred yards ahead of us. And the Jerry's were everywhere, of course. And so things quieted down pretty good that night. I think the Jerry's were regrouping because there wasn't much going on. And then we pushed off the next morning and started advancing. We were with the 116th Regiment of the 29th Division we were attached to.
Vern, I'd like to introduce you to Ludwig. Ludwig is joining us from Germany, and he has some questions that he'd like to ask you.
Hi, at first, it's really a pleasure and an honor to join you. And my first question would be, how were your experiences at the liberation of Dillingen? Because Dillingen is not far away from my hometown.
Oh, and what town?
Dillingen.
What town again?
Dillingen.
No, well, the only,
Dillingen.
no, we weren't around Gilligan. We were supposed to, our main objective was the Verville-sur-Mer. That was our first, was supposed to be D+1.
No, this is VE Day. This is.
Oh, VE Day. I'm sorry. VE Day.
So
VE Day, I was in
this young
a
man
little town in
is
Belgium
speaking to you
by
from
the name of
Germany.
Deant.
Yeah.
He's coming to you from Germany, from the town of Dillingen, and is asking you to tell him the story about Dillingen, which is quite close to his hometown in Germany.
You were at Diligent, weren't you?
Huh?
Weren't you at Diligent?
I don't recall Diligent.
You pronounce it differently than you do. Dilligan.
I don't recall.
Okay.
That's okay, Vern. Do you remember, tell us about being in Germany. How were your experiences after you'd crossed the Saar River and you'd moved into Germany?
What?
After you crossed the Saar River and moved into Germany.
Oh, well, I don't recall when we crossed the Far when we went to, what was the name of the town? It's right on the banks of the Rhine. We would, I don't remember really, there was Germany and France, we were just going from one to the other several times. We would attach to different divisions, and we were always on the point because they wanted the mortars. And I remember we were in a town by the name of, we crossed the Saarlotten. We were in Saarlotten, and we crossed that river into
It's okay. You might need to cut it.
all that stuff. And this town was Diligent, wasn't it? Wasn't it Diligent?
Yeah, that's what you've been talking about.
Dillingen, yes.
Diligent was right on the banks of the Saar River. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yes. Just tell him about it. Just tell him.
I don't think I'm on.
Yes, you are.
Am I on?
Yes, they're waiting on you to talk. Don't look at them. Look at this.
Yeah.
Go ahead and talk.
Yeah, I can remember Diligent now. We crossed the Saar River. That was at Saarlotten. And on December 6th, we crossed that morning. I was in a little rubber boat with my lieutenant and a helper, and I was on the radio at a forward observation. We traveled with the infantry, and we paddled across that river, and we crawled up on a little embankment. It was a road on our right that went to a bridge, and but I don't think the bridge was there, but I mean, that was where we landed to the left of that. And the engineers were trying to build a bridge, and they were under constant fire from artillery. So we worked our way into the town, and we set up our observation post in an old warehouse building, and directed a lot of fire. We were under constant small arms fire, and had there was a lot of casualties. But it was about 6-7 days maybe close to 10 days. We were there, and we had the town pretty well done. Is that your hometown at Diligent? Is that what your young fellow was talking about?
No, I don't think so, but
so anyway,
the story is anyway pretty interesting. Yeah. Dillingen is near Donau River.
Ludwig.
Well, the reason we had to pull out because they hit the north of us. They hit that's when the Bulge hit. So we were with the 94th Division at the time. We pulled back and left our equipment pretty much there. We had our equipment on the other side, the mortars, but we had to pull back with the infantry, and we still had to paddle back in our little rubber boat we found down there. They had several of them laying there, and then we took off for north. We were on our way to the Bulge, and we just went, never stopped, no sleep, and we were on the way up, and of course, like the other fellows said, the weather was not very good. It was cold and snowy, but we got there and went into action. And we were very fortunate on that because by being in Diligent and Charlotten there at the river, we missed out on the main part of the Bulge. We got in on the tail end of it, and we beat them up pretty good with our mortars. But
Ludwig has another question
there.
for you, Vern.
Yes, as a German, I'm pretty interested in your experiences you made when your unit entered Germany and got in touch with the German population. Did you have any special experiences with people from Germany?
The civilians.
The civilians, did you have any interaction with the civilians in Germany?
No, there wasn't any. Hardly any. Where we were, there was hardly any Germans, civilians. We run into a few French civilians, especially going through Paris. And we run into Belgium, the civilians, because they didn't seem to, they had come back in after the Jerry's left. And that, in many cases, that's what happened. But we didn't see too many civilians. They just weren't around. Well, there was a place in, we went through a little town going into Germany out of Belgium, a little town by the name of St. Vith. It's probably heard about it. It's the last town in Belgium before Germany. And into that, we went into what they call the Siegfried Line. The Germans had built several pillboxes along the line of Germany and Belgium up in that area, and what they called a Hertigen Forest. And we were with the 4th Division at that time. And we went through there. The Germans were not very nice people. There was some civilians there, and they were all coming out, and they were congratulating us and all. And there was a group of people off to the side on our left that were not doing anything. And we had an interpreter, and he wanted to know what the thing was. And the Germans, when they went through their retreating, some of the kids came out and gave them a bad time. You know how kids can jeer and oh, la, 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 and all that kind of stuff. So one German, apparently not right in his head, pulled out a hand grenade and threw it in a group of the kids. And I get choked up every time I hear about it, I think about it. But
Vern, it's a
They
very sad
weren't
story.
we didn't take too many prisoners.
Yeah, it's a very sad
We run
story.
into quite a
And I
battle
think
there.
perhaps one of the things that you're able to talk to about today is to give us some advice. If you had a message for young people in your community or in communities in Europe, what would it be?
Well, salute the flag for one thing, and always stand up in honor of the flag, and pray to God, and stay honest, and pay your bills. The young kids today, so many of them are going the wrong way. Back when I was a kid, you know, we didn't have drugs. We didn't have much of anything really in the Depression. And the kids today are spoiled, a lot of them, because they've got everything. Even the sports in the high schools, the equipment they have today is unbelievable. I mean, we had leather helmets when we played football and high shoes with round cleats. And these kids today have got equipment like professionals. And I think a lot of them don't appreciate what they have.
Well, we certainly appreciate you joining us here today, Vern. And I think your advice, stay honest, pay your bills, those are things that absolutely relate to any person, young or old, wherever they are. I'd really like to thank you for being here and also Ludwig for coming on. We're going to take a short break and we'll be back in 1 minute. If you'd like to join some of the other conversations that are happening this week, you can do that at europeremembers.com. Hi, welcome back to Europe Remembers. This is the second day of a week-long program that's bringing you conversations with people who remember World War II. It's also, those conversations are with participants who have gone to our website, europeremembers.com, and registered to take part. Tomorrow, we'll be having conversations in French, followed by conversations in German on Thursday, and then on Friday, which is VE Day here in Europe, we'll be having other conversations in English with veterans from Canada, the UK, and the US, as well as people who were civilians and have really clear memories of what they were doing at the time. Today, we've heard from two of the Rosies, a wonderful organisation based in the US that has members who are women who worked in factories, heavy industries, shipyards, building planes, and ordnance that were used during the Second World War. We also heard from Paul Grassy, who's written a wonderful book, as well as Buck Marsh and Vern Oller. We're now going to Ken Beckman. Unfortunately, Ken has a couple of issues with his computer, and we may not be able to see him for all of the time, but we will be able to hear him and to talk to him about what he remembers from his time in the Second World War. Friday is 75 years since VE Day, and Ken went on after the war and continued in the military after working as a navigator on B-17 bombers over the UK, Benelux and Germany. We're also joined by Nolan from Texas, who has signed up on our website to speak with Ken. Ken, are you there, Ken? How are you?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you very well, Ken.
Good.
It's lovely that you could join us.
It's nice to be here.
I'm wondering, Ken, how did you decide which branch of the military to join? Why not the Marines?
Well, I always wanted to be a flyer. And when I had the opportunity, I took some exams, and they turned out that with my background, I would be best suited as a navigator. And that suited me fine because I'd been interested in navigation for a number of years before I came into the service, mostly boat navigation.
And Ken, if you don't mind me asking, can you explain for people who perhaps aren't as familiar with planes and navigation, what exactly did your job as a navigator involve?
Well, as a lead navigator, in the lead aircraft, we were followed on generally by anywhere from 18 to 36 to 72 airplanes. And in the lead crew would take charge of finding the target with the other aircraft following. And when we dropped bombs, the lead bombardier would be in charge of his bombs, and all of the other aircraft behind us would drop their bombs on his signal. As soon as they saw the bombs leaving the lead aircraft, all of the other bombardiers in the formation would drop their bombs as well. So there were not many people dropping bombs by themselves. It was a group effort.
It must have taken an enormous amount of coordination and teamwork to be able to do those missions.
Yes, I'm having trouble hearing you a little bit, but yes, it took a great bit of coordination.
Thank you. So we have Nolan. Nolan's from Texas, and here's some questions for you today.
Hi, Ken. I wanted to ask how you felt about the people you were fighting at the time, and then how would you feel about them now?
At the time, we were, of course, concerned that we were hurting folks that didn't really deserve to be hurt. but unfortunately, that's what war is all about. And we're doing our part. And as a result, I felt badly about the hundreds, perhaps thousands of people that I was responsible for killing. But unfortunately, that's what war is all about. I had no personal contact with any German folks at all.
So where were you stationed, Ken?
I was stationed in the Midlands in England, in the 305th Bomb Group. Perhaps the worst mission my group suffered was on I believe it was the 14th of October at Schweinfurt. The name Schweinfurt is well known in air circles in the United States because it was quite a bad day for the Air Force. In my particular group, we sent out 13 airplanes and only 2 got back. The rest were down somewhere between England and in Germany.
Wow, that's so sad, Ken. I'm sorry. Perhaps it's a good time to bring in Nolan, who has another question for you.
Sure. I also wanted to ask about how old you were when you were shipped off to Europe.
Well, I was commissioned when I was about a week after my 21st birthday, and I spent 2 years in England. I had 2 tours in England. The first one was from October of 43 to April of 44, the 10th of April, as a matter of fact, and the target was actually Brussels. And it's one of my favorite war stories. On that particular day, the target was an airfield a little, as I recall, it was a little bit southeast of Brussels. And the bombardier in our lead airplane was a very accomplished bombardier. He had a great name in England as being one of the leading bombardiers. But for some reason, he flat out missed the target that day. And 4 or 5 seconds before bombs away, he had to make a turn. And for some reason, his bombs fell way outside the target. And we had 35 airplanes behind us that dropped on his signal. So we flat out missed the target. That was the 25th mission on my first tour. And after, a few weeks before the end of my tour, the word went out that the 8th Air Force was looking for lead navigators and lead bombardiers and lead pilots, because we had apparently suffered a pretty good loss of them. And there were 64 of us in the 8th Air Force that volunteered, and I happened to be one of them. So we went home for 30 days and came back. And 6 months after that last raid on my first tour, the target was Cologne in Germany, and our aircraft was pretty well hurt. We lost an engine over the target, over Cologne, and the second engine was not in real good shape. We turned back after bombs away, and we started to lose a little bit of altitude because we had 3 engines to work on and a not very healthy third engine, which ultimately we lost. And my pilot asked me for a heading for some place where we could land. And the only spot I could think of was Brussels. So we landed. After some difficulty, we actually landed with 1 engine still operating, but we landed at the airfield that we missed on the 10th of April. And this was the date on this mission was 15 October. If it hadn't been for that airfield still functioning, I don't have a clue as to where we would have wound up. I'm sure we would have had to crash land. but thanks to Joe, who missed the target, we're still alive to talk about it.
Well, Ken, we're very glad you are, because we've got Michelle here, and she has her 9-year-old son with her, and they're speaking to you from the UK.
What inspired you? Hello?
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
What surprised you?
What would you like to say to Ken?
What surprised you most about the war?
I beg your pardon, I didn't get your question again.
Speak up.
What surprised you most about the war?
What surprised me most about the war?
Yeah.
Really, how horrible it was. It was not a good experience, but it was one of those things that had to be done. It's kind of hard to explain. I guess I haven't done a very good job of explaining it.
I think we understand. Perhaps you could tell Ken your name and also what it is that you're wearing on your shirt.
My name is
I can see it. It looks like a pretty rose from here.
It's a poppy.
Oh, is it a poppy?
It's a poppy, yes it is. And what's your name?
Oh yes, I remember the poppies after the First World War.
That's right. And where did they grow?
They grew in the flounders fields.
That's right. And what's your name? So he knows.
My name is Noah.
And you live in?
And I live in Portsmouth in the UK.
Oh, well, it's nice to have met you.
Nice.
Nice to meet you too.
We think it's an honour to have been able to speak to you. Seems it's very important this week as it's VE Day on Friday. Do you have any plans to celebrate on Friday?
No particular plans. It was a great day, and I enjoyed the fireworks that I saw that evening. We were in the Midlands. We were in the middle of not much to see around the bases at all. We didn't have any big cities anywhere close to us, and as a result, there wasn't an awful lot of celebration going on. But all of a sudden, to the east, we saw some fireworks going off. So we crawled to the top of our building, our barracks building that we were living in, and I spent about a half an hour looking at fireworks off to the east. That's essentially all I can recall about VE Day.
And did you know what the fireworks were for? How did you find out what was happening?
Oh, yes. We got the word about the surrendering and so forth earlier in the day, but there wasn't a great deal of celebrating. We were, if it hadn't been a VE Day, we probably would have been preparing for the next day's mission. Thank goodness it was over.
I've got a question here from Barry. Barry says, did your bomber have nose art? And what was her name?
Did my bombardier have a name, you said?
Yes, did she have a name and art on her nose?
Did my plane have a name?
Yes.
Oh, I flew in many aircraft. I went over and I flew in an aircraft that was named Old Bill, but from about my 5th mission on, and I flew a total of 48 missions, 25 on my first tour and 23 on my second tour. And of all those missions, every time a lead crew was selected, we flew in different aircraft. We went to several bases and used their aircraft. And on occasion, we would use our own aircraft. But I flew probably in probably 24 different aircraft during those missions, perhaps more than that.
Well, the planes are some of the most exciting and also iconic moments of the Second World War. And I think we have some more questions about your experiences as a pilot from the UK.
What would you like to ask? How many would it be, and how many missions did you fly?
I flew 48 missions total, 25 on my first tour and 23 on my second tour.
Wow.
What advice would you give us now?
Oh, golly, I don't feel real qualified to give news, but I'd say support your government, do all you can to keep peace in the world. There's no good excuse for going to war. If we could only learn to live together in harmony. So be good to your neighbors and friends, be good to yourself.
Wow, that's fantastic advice.
Fantastic.
It is, isn't it? And an honour. Do you think there's anything that's been learned now from the time then?
I didn't get your questions quite. Could you restate it, please?
Do you think the world now has learnt any lessons from going to war then? Have we learnt anything, do you think?
Well, of course, technology has taken a gigantic leap. But as far as getting along is concerned, I think that the same old story that we've had for centuries will, I don't know exactly how to put it, try to get along as best you can. And we're still trying to learn the things that will keep us peaceful and in love with ourselves and our friends.
Well, are you happy now?
Oh, I'm very happy. I'm happy to be alive still. I'm 98 years old.
Wow.
Wow.
Well, that seems like a perfect note to end on. So the advice is avoid going to war. And we'd like to thank Ken for being here and thank everyone who participated today. Our two Rosies, Ruth and Moselle, and Paul, Ken, Vern, and Buck. It's been lovely having these conversations and a privilege to have you with us.
So it's an honour.
A very special moment.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it.
And we have as well. There'll be other conversations later in the week, and if you'd like to be a part of those, you can register at europeremembers.com. You can also post your memories and stories or messages to some of the people that we've had on today using hashtag #IRemember and hashtag europeremembers.com. Thanks for joining us.